Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a little bit different than my normal content, but I am so excited about it. I'm going to tell you guys my favorite books that I read this year in 2022. This year, I found my love for reading again. I used to love reading. I feel like I've always gone through phases, but I went through a phase in middle school, and then I went through a phase again in high school, and I would read nonstop, and then I just got out of it. And then at the beginning of 2022, me and my husband set a goal to read one book a month, so 12 books in a year, and that just kickstarted this love of books for me again. It's definitely become one of my favorite hobbies and one of my favorite things to do. So I thought I would share with you guys my favorite books that I read this year. I think I read 23 books this year, and I think I have about 10 books that I'm going to share with you guys, and that's including series, so not that many. But these are all of my 4 and 5-star reads with some caveats. Okay, before we get started, I feel like I just need to say this. So number one, I am not that much of a critical reader, and I mean, I'm not very critical about the writing style, and I'm not super picky when it comes to how things are written and things like that. So I don't really do ratings based off of that either. I rate a book based on whether I enjoyed it or not and whether I felt like it was worth my time. And I know a lot of people rate books on if they like the writing style or blah 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 blah, and obviously that affects how I enjoy the book, but I feel like I'm just not a super critical thinker or reader. I just enjoy it and I just sit down and just read. And so I feel like that was something I should say. Another thing that I want to point out is that I really don't like a lot of books with a ton of spice in them or a lot of language. So I feel like a lot of the books that I recommend either don't have that, or if they do, I'll give you a disclaimer so that you can know going into it, because I know it's a big deal for me. Movies are so easy to tell if it's appropriate for the audience or not, and you can tell if you'll want to watch it based off of the rating, and books don't really have that. So whenever I finish a book, I'll often post on my Instagram and say yeah, this was pretty clean, or had some cuss words here and there. I generally will not recommend a book if it has spice in it. I generally will stop reading it if it does, just because that's something I don't really want to read about, and that's just my personal preference. So I want to give those disclaimers before we get started. So with all that being said, let's get started into my favorite books of 2022. So I'm looking at my Goodreads here, which I have debated on whether or not I want to share that publicly, and I'll link it down below for you guys if you want to see it, just because, again, if I read a book and maybe I wouldn't verbally recommend it, I don't want you guys thinking that I approve whatever's in there, if that makes sense, but I know I'm overthinking that. Okay, so the first book is the book that started my love for reading again, and it's called One of Us is Lying. I gave it to a friend, so I don't have it with me, but this book was so good. I gave it 5 stars at first, but then I realized, it's probably not a 5-star book, so I gave it 4 stars. Again, I'm really easy on my ratings, okay? So the premise of the book is very interesting, and you get different point of views, which I tend to really like. So you get 4 point of views. You get a girl that's the beauty, another girl that's the brains, you get a guy that's kind of like a criminal, and then another guy that's the athlete. So they're all in detention together with this guy named Simon. Simon created their school's notorious gossip website, and while they're in detention together, Simon just drops dead, and then they determine that his death was actually a murder. And all 4 people's point of views that you're following, they all have something to hide. That's why it's called One of Us is Lying. And everyone has all these secrets, and it's just very interesting and a very easy read. And I read that book very quickly, and I was like, oh my gosh, I love reading again. And so that book has just a special place in my heart because it kickstarted my reading again. Also, the order I'm going in is the order I read the books, not in my favorite order, if that makes sense. So the next book I read was The Silent Patient. This was a 4-star read for me. So this book is about a girl named Alicia who one day just shoots her husband 5 times in the face and then never speaks a word again. But after that, she is put into a psychiatric unit, and then there's a psychotherapist named Theo who is so intrigued by her and her story, and he wants to get her to speak. He wants to figure out, why did she kill her husband? So it's all about that. And let me tell you, the ending of this book I did not see coming. The kind of book where you finish it and you close the page and you're just what did I just read? I had to pause for a second and just think. It was such a good book. I really recommend this. I do remember that this book does mention some drugs, and I think it does have a bit of language. I don't think it's if it was a ton, I would have stopped reading it, but I do remember some strong language in here. Nonetheless, 4 stars, such a good read. Next book that I read that I loved and was actually a 5-star read for me was Where the Crawdads Sing. So I actually read it right before it came out as a movie, and this book was so interesting. At first, I was bored to death because the beginning, like the first 100 pages, is really setting the scene, and this book is very descriptive and it really helps you like imagine things. And I don't know, I really love a page turner, so I was getting a little bored, but I was like, you know what, just keep pushing through. And then around page 100, I remember it picked up, and next thing I knew, I was just flying through it. I can at least respect the descriptive writing because it really helps propel the story. Like, it just kind of wrapped everything together, which is why I gave this book 5 stars. Let me tell you, the ending of that book got me. There were 2 plot twists that I was like, boom, boom, and I just did not see them coming. It was very, very good. It was so good that I made Sam read it, and he loved it as well. So Where the Crawdads Sings follows this girl named Kaya who grew up along the marsh, and by a really young age, pretty much all her family left her. So there were always all these rumors about the marsh girl going around town because she was very excluded and out like on her own, and people always thought she was very mysterious. So you fast forward a few years and they find Chase Andrews dead, and the entire town suspects that Kaya killed him because they're like, why not? She's an outcast, and they once were associated with each other. You're following like a past and present perspective. So there's murder mystery, there's love stories, and there's all these unanswered questions that you're trying to put together, and the ending just magically ties it all up in a bow, and it is so good. Okay, next book was probably one of my favorite books I read all year, and that is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. This again is a young adult murder mystery that is so interesting. I gave this book 5 stars. So this book follows a girl named Pip who, for her senior capstone project, decides to re-examine a case that's been closed in her town. And the case was about a girl named Andy Bell who was murdered by her boyfriend, who then killed himself. So everyone thought the case was closed, it was fine. So Pip starts re-investigating it, and she goes, wait a second, this doesn't seem right. And she starts discovering a trail of secrets, and people don't want her finding things out, and it's all about that, and it is so interesting. This book was amazing. It was so fun. It was thrilling. I was flying through the pages, and I really liked how it was written. It was so easy to read, and there's also a little bit of romance in there, which is really fun. And this book is actually a part of a series, and overall I give that series 5 stars. So the next book after this one is Good Girl, Bad Blood, which I can't find that book. When I finished this book, I was like, I don't know how she's gonna write another book. I didn't feel like it would be good. I felt like she was just trying to continue this series since this book did so well. But the next book was also amazing. She did such a good job. I gave that book 5 stars as well. So Good Girl, Bad Blood also follows Pip, and she decides to start a podcast, and now they're investigating a missing persons case. So then it follows that whole story, and it was just very good. And the last book in the series is called As Good as Dead, and this is actually a new book. It just came out, and a lot of people either love this book the most or the least, and I was the person that loved it the least, but I have my reasons for it. But I also can see why people loved it the most. So after Pip has her podcast that does super well, notices that she's getting like a ton of death threats, and now someone's coming after her. And the reason why I gave this book 4 stars and not 5 like the rest of the series was because it kind of got a lot darker. But I also understand why, because Pip went through a lot. So you see this character development of her growing up. She's been through a lot of crazy stuff. And so I understand that part of things, but it definitely just goes kind of down a different route than I expected. And the first 2 books are pretty clean overall. I remember the last book got a little bit darker, so that's just something to mention. But overall, it's young adult, so it's not going to be anything terrible. Okay, guys, my next favorite books are the Inheritance Games series. This series has my heart. This is definitely tied at first place with A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. So the first book in the series is called The Inheritance Games, and I'm not giving anything away. I'm just giving a synopsis that it generally says on the back. But there's a girl named Avery who is kind of really struggling, isn't well off, and she lives with her sister, and she's just trying to graduate high school, and all of a sudden she gets told that she was left in the will of this super rich billionaire who she's never met and never heard of. And so she goes to the reading of the will with the billionaire's family, and turns out he pretty much left her his entire fortune. So the whole book is about why did he leave it for her. Now his whole family pretty much hates her because she got the entire fortune they thought they were gonna get. There's a love triangle, there's tons of mysteries. I've heard a lot of people compare this to the movie Knives Out, which it is a little bit similar, and I gave this book 5 stars easily. It was so good. I wish I could read it all over again. And so some questions that were left unanswered in this book get figured out in this book, and the love story just keeps unfolding and the mysteries keep going. It again was so good, and I feel like the love triangle just was getting me. I didn't know who I wanted her to be with. It was such a fun read, and it was just as easy as the first book, so I gave this one 5 stars as well. I think this is the final book in the series. I'm not sure if she's coming out with another one, but it's called The Final Gambit. And this book was really good, but in my opinion, it wasn't as good as the first two. So I gave this one 4 stars. But is it the book's fault or my fault? I don't know. I kind of felt myself starting to get into a reading slump. So I don't know if it was just me or if it was the book, but overall, I really enjoyed the book. And this book is them solving one last puzzle that puts all the pieces together. And overall, this series was just truly the best. I love it. Overall, it's a 5-star series. The only negative thing I have to say about this series was that I didn't like how short the chapters were, but that's just like a very minor opinion. I think my brain, like whenever a chapter ends, my brain like pauses and goes, okay, do I need to go do something else or can I keep reading? And the chapters are literally like 3 pages long. They're very short. Some are just literally 1 page. So I was constantly like stopping and I was like telling my brain, no, like we can keep going. So that was the only thing that I didn't like about the book. But other than that, 5-star series. It was so good. So this next book, I was torn on whether I should share it or not, but I decided to share it. So this is The Red Queen, and this is actually a fantasy book. It's a part of a series. Now, I'm going to explain the book and then I'll explain why I didn't know if I should put it in here or not. So this book follows a girl named Mare Barrow, and her world is divided by blood. So there's silver bloods and then there's red bloods. The silver bloods have special powers. They're like the elite, and the red bloods are just basic, boring people. They're the outcasts. They're the oppressed. And Mare, who is red-blooded, figures out that she has powers like the silvers. So it's her figuring out what to do in this world of like trying to hide her powers, but the king and queen figure out that she does have powers. And this book was just so fun to read. There's a love triangle in here. There's tons of plot twists. It's such a fun world to unfold. I really enjoyed reading this book, and I gave it 4 stars. The reason I considered not mentioning it was because this book is a part of a series, and I think the series has 5 books total. And I read the second book and I gave it 3 stars. I was like, okay, wasn't as good as the first book, but maybe the next book will be better. Like maybe it just went down, it will go back up. So then I read the third book, which is called King's Cage. And guys, it is the only book I DNF'd this year. I could not finish that book, and I think it's just because it was very drawn out and I was getting kind of bored. I was interested enough to read it, but I wasn't like super excited to keep reading. And I'm the kind of person, again, that loves a page turner. So I decided to pause on reading it. I hope to finish it one day, but I decided just to move on because there were so many other books I wanted to read, and honestly I hadn't read in like a month, and I was like, okay, this isn't worth me not reading at all just because I want to say I finished a book. So I decided to put a pause on it. But overall, this book was so good. So hopefully I'll pick it back up and it will be better. Who knows? So my next favorite book that I read this year is Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. This book is a thriller mystery, I would say. This was my first book that I read by Riley Sager. He's pretty big in like the mystery genre, and it was very good. I gave this book 4 stars. So this book is about a girl named Jules who sees a newspaper advertisement about this really fancy apartment building in New York City that needs an apartment sitter. So she's literally getting paid to just stay at a really fancy, secretive building in New York City. It's right across from Central Park. It's all the things you dream of a New York apartment. And as she's staying there, she starts meeting other apartment sitters, and she realizes that one of them goes missing. And she's trying to figure out where she is, and she's starting to realize that the building isn't all that it seems. There's all these secrets, and she feels like she might not ever be able to get out. I'm trying to remember. I don't think this book had any spicy scenes or anything like that. There was some language, but it was very interesting, and the ending really surprised me, and it was definitely not what I was expecting. So it was just a very good read overall. My last best book of the year is called Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. This book I actually just finished last week, and it was so good. It's one of those books that you feel like you're watching a movie in your head. Like I can clearly see everything. I felt like I knew the characters very well. It was just amazing. So I gave this book 4 stars. So this book is like a mystery thriller, and it follows this married couple that are really on the brink of divorce, and they are choosing to have a getaway to Scotland to kind of fix their marriage, to try to mend things, give it one last chance. And the husband has this thing called face blindness, where he can't recognize features of anybody's face, so he can't tell the difference between his wife and just a stranger on the street unless he hears their voice or something like that. And one of them is lying, and someone doesn't want them to live happily ever after. I don't know how else to explain it without you just reading it. This one, it put me through a headspin. I was very, very shocked. The ending had my jaw on the floor. I was so surprised. It was so good. Actually, maybe I gave this 5 stars. Oh yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, I gave this book 5 stars. I was like, why would I give it 4 stars? It was so good. I really recommend this. If you're looking for a good mystery, this is it. Overall, I would say it was pretty appropriate. It has some mentioning of sex and things like that, but it doesn't give any explicits. And I think I remember there being some language, but it's not super heavy. But it was a very good book, a little creepy, like I wouldn't read this book at night, but it wasn't anything over the top. I loved this book. Those were my favorite books that I read this year. Let me know if you guys enjoyed seeing this video, and if you want to see more book videos from me. I definitely want to increase my reading goal for 2023. We'll see what happens. Be sure to comment down below what your favorite book of 2022 was, or your favorite series. So let me know any of your book recommendations down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.